Yo, 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 what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today I wanted to talk about chat toxicity and just toxicity in general within kingdoms, whether that is within world chat that it's happening in, if it's within your alliance chat, if it's within your alliance Discord, your kingdom Discord. And I just wanted to talk about what I feel some of the implications and really probably more so the after effects, right? What are some of the ripples that can be caused from kind of seeing public toxicity being done? But then also, what are just some general things that you can do about it in the event if you don't want to see those things? But then how can you even go about addressing it? So those are a few of the areas. Now, let's start, if we can, first with when you have any level of chat toxicity. And that could be, for me, how I really define that is by players who are just doing things in a pretty ill-intended, kind of disrespectful, rude way that can that can be anything from light all the way up to, let's just say, rated R stuff and beyond. And I think the number one thing for me is, what are some of the challenges, right? What are some of the problems that can be caused, right, from seeing these things being done publicly in chats? Well, let's go over some of the obvious. If you're in a kingdom or you're in an alliance and you're just seeing a consistent level of toxicity on its scale, depending on where it may land, this can cause players to want to leave your alliance. It can cause players, even before that, to maybe stop being as active in chat. It can cause players to recede. And you may see less or lower levels of engagement outside of them just becoming less social. Then, like I said, if it expands and kind of gets to that endpoint, it could eventually result in players wanting to leave the alliance. You could see players that will do the same thing on a kingdom level. They'll probably stop being as social. Maybe they'll stop showing up to events. That can kind of become more of a widespread thing, especially if it's kind of like a cancer, right? It can kind of infect other alliances as well beyond what it's just seeing. Because sometimes the idea is when you're playing in an alliance, you're kind of isolated. You feel a little bit protected in a sense, because if you're seeing something happening in another alliance, most of the time, those things aren't necessarily direct reflections, or will kind of have crossovers from one alliance to another immediately. So sometimes you have this almost feeling of comfortability and a safety net where if you see some craziness going on across the way, you know that if nothing's really going on or nothing crazy is happening in your alliance, you almost feel a little bit more of a relief at times. But then once you start seeing those things bleeding over into world chat, well, let's be honest, these are things that can cause players to want to potentially, at worst case, leave the kingdom, right? Migrate out, or even worse, maybe they'll just stop talking as much in world chat. And sometimes that's the start of it, where you'll see players that will slow down their activity or their chat activity, their social engagement in world chat, and that at times can bleed over into their own alliance and even in areas beyond in-game chats, for example, i.e. your Discord, whether that's your alliance Discord or your kingdom Discord. And there's a lot of these almost kind of factor into the general idea of player drop-off, right? Where you can see drop-off in a few different ways, but in its worst form, or its most impactful form, is when player drop-off occurs from players that just stop playing their accounts, migrate out, stop playing the game and uninstall, etc. And this is one of those things that, unfortunately, and it's not to say that I think every kingdom is going to have some level of toxicity, but I will say there is always the chance, and I don't mean to say that in a good way, it's just, it is what it is. There's always the possibility, let's say, that you can have some level of toxicity within public chats within a kingdom. And that, to me, it is unfortunate, because I think when you look at it on the bigger picture, don't get me wrong, friendly banter, competitive banter, most of the time that's all done, that's all well, good, and fine, right? Or done and fine, well, good, and I'm sure there's a phrase there I'm missing. But most of the time it's harmless, right? Especially if that's something that you kind of have two sides or two entities that are going back and forth on, it's pretty apparent that that's happening. However, most of the time when we see levels of toxicity that are happening, the challenge then becomes, well, a lot of times we take things at face value, right? I'm sure some of us have seen moments in game where it looks like someone's being toxic, but then they hit you with a JK or lol, I'm just kidding, or anything that's kind of loosely related to that. And part of it is that there's this perception of how the optics look. How does it look at face value, right? Well, it looks like this person is being rude or being mean, or they're being toxic to someone else, or to an alliance, or to a group of players, or to the kingdom as a whole. And those can be difficult to want to kind of be a part of a kingdom or an alliance where you're seeing those things consistently happening. So, I'll tell you how I go about addressing it. If I see some level of toxicity happening in a kingdom, one of the first things I like to try and do is, if I'm unable, or usually attempting to address it myself. However, if that's not usually the first step, I would ask someone, whether that's an officer, even at times more preferably a leader, to say, hey, look, if this player's in your alliance, can you go and have a conversation with this player and just figure out what's going on, right? Did someone call him a name? Were some people attacking him? Did he get attacked? And maybe that's why he's venting. Oftentimes, it can be good to try and figure out what the source of it is. Now, again, we're not talking for people that make new accounts in kingdoms and just go into that kingdom to be toxic on purpose or to rile people up. I'm talking more so about the people, because that's easy to figure out. I'm talking about the players who are organically or kind of grass-fed, if you will, from being there. So sorry for all the animal terms or farming terms, but right, someone who has been there, like an OG player who's been there from the beginning, or they just actively play there with a main account. That's probably a better way of putting it. And trying to figure out why they are being toxic or why they're saying the things they are. The one thing that you don't want to do, which often happens, is that the moment that someone is toxic or is being mean in chat, you'll try and have the grammar police or the toxic police come out and try to de-escalate the situation. However, there are different forms of de-escalation that more often than not, it usually appears that I don't want to say wrong, but the not the best way of doing it is typically done. And what I often see is that players will, in turn, respond in kind, where they'll basically try to counter toxicity with some of their own toxicity. Or they'll try and come off in a passive-aggressive way, or try to point the finger, or try and command this person or individual or individuals on what to do. And that's just oftentimes not the way that you really go about addressing it, right? Soft skills, and I'll probably do a video on this later, is a big thing for me when it comes to understanding the right and kind of the wrong ways to go about speaking to people, whether that's via text, whether that's via voice, and also how you go about approaching people. First impressions are incredibly important, especially for establishing some level of equality, balance, and trying just to come off in a non-threatening way. And so when you see those types of situations, my recommendation is find someone who is good at speaking to people, and have them reach out to those individuals that you see are being toxic, so that way you can attempt to address those things, if you do not already have someone from that alliance that's able to do it from wherever that player may be. And then beyond that, let's say, okay, well, what can I do, boss, if players are just being toxic? Well, the easiest thing really to do is just to go here, click on someone's name, and then click block, right? And then that way you don't have to see any of their posts publicly anymore. And if it's at a point where said player and or players are continuing their toxicity even after a conversation or an attempt to reach out to them to figure things out has been done, then really at that point you should just try to issue some type of server-wide block, where it's, hey, maybe if they're saying things that are borderline, then everyone reports that person, right? Easy way to do that is you click here, you'll click on, I think you have to click on the pro, oh no, sorry, it's the message that they sent, I think that's what it is. So let's go here. So we'll click on the message, and then you click report, right? So you get people to mass report that individual, obviously, if it is something that is worth reporting. And then after that, you can have everyone go and block them, right? Or you don't block them and you basically continue to mass report them if they continue to be toxic, right? And then, bearing in mind, from what I understand, is they kind of have to work their way up on the reprimanding tier list. So it might start off with, as an example, a couple hours worth of muting or 24 hours worth of muting, and then it goes up to 2 or 3 days, and then so on and so forth. So, at times that can really be the best way to do it, right? Especially if you're trying to action something beyond, is, again, have everyone do a mass report, message everyone, let them know to do it on the same exact post that was made. And then really that's probably the best thing to really do first. And then your backup is to just have everyone block that individual. And then obviously you can always take it up to the next notch, which is removing those people from alliances, trying to do other things that hopefully would allow for said player or players to start recognizing that them acting that way or continuing to act that way after multiple attempts have been made to reach out and to try to fix or mend the situation have just failed, or they're just not interested, right? Then you can start doing things in game to kind of combat that by removing them from alliance for a period of time. Maybe you eventually blacklist them if they keep it up and you don't allow them into any alliances. Then maybe some attacking is involved there, while at the same time you're constantly reporting their posts or the same one. And then eventually if there's just nothing else that can be done, or they're not going to work their way up to some type of lifetime mute, then at that point it would be have everyone block them, right? But kind of taking those steps and trying to reach out, I always find is a great initial attempt to do. However, what I would love to hear from you all now is, what are some things, because I can tell you right now, I think one of the probably biggest things I've seen happen is which is almost the extent of probably what the worst case scenario is. But I've seen situations happen where players were being toxic in chat, and that bled over because they're responding. Other people are trying to respond to that or trying to combat that. And then sometimes you'll see fights or almost kind of like verbal arguments that will start from other people that were trying to come in and combat the toxicity, and they kind of just got lost in the sauce. And that has caused for alliances to actually go to war and fight each other. And sometimes and not to say it happens all the time, but I've seen this happen before, where then a civil war ensues. And so, these are things that, again, if not handled with a level of TLC, some tender love and care, they can really have anywhere from small to big ripples within your kingdom. So that's why, again, try to find someone who can kind of be that person for you if you're not able to have someone already within your alliances, your number of alliances. And don't let this be something that tears your kingdom down, tears your alliance down. Try to think of ways to proactively have kind of contingencies or people on standby that can address when these things come up. And this also, again, can be more difficult or challenging if your kingdom isn't unified, or if you don't have a majority or a good amount of alliances that are all kind of together, where you can kind of pool multiple resources or larger resources, right? Because you might have to just rely independently on your alliance. But now, again, I want to kind of pass the question off to you all. Let me know if there's ever been a moment or a situation in a kingdom you've played in, whether it's CoD, whether it's Rock or another kingdom builder. And obviously, if it is CoD, that's great because it's a little more relevant. But again, given that CoD's newer, there probably just isn't as much history established thus far, just because the majority of the kingdoms haven't played through a first season yet. But I still would love to know. What is a moment that happened or a situation that happened in a kingdom, in an alliance you were playing in, where player or players were being toxic in public chats, whether that's your alliance chat or your kingdom chat, and what type of ripple effects or what type of results or ill-intended or poor results happened or came from it because of that? I'd love to hear. So let us know in the comments down below, and hopefully this will be a nice educational read. That's going to do it for me. As always, instead of saying happy hunting, happy conversating is what I'm going to say in your kingdom. I think it's drastically important, and hopefully this video at least helps in some ways to address that, along with some of the challenges that are there right now, which, again, hopefully this helps out in some degree. That's going to do it for me. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.